A momentous day here at Simon Scott Assembly Hall as Darian DeVries is announced as Indiana's 31st head coach going into the 2025-26 season. Peegs.com's Jeff Rabjohns, Trevor Anderstock, Jerry Kelly here to break it all down. Rabbi, we just heard from Darian DeVries. Very impressive press conference. You could tell he was a little bit nervous there. What are the things that stood out to you initially coming out of it?
Yeah, I think for me, three things jumped out the most. A number of things he said were pretty impressive. The three that jumped out the most, when he stands there and talks about the process is the process, your standards are standards, you don't deviate from them. It's like Kurt Cignetti, he talks about what they do and how they do it the way Cignetti talks about what Cignetti does for the football team. That jumped out. The other thing was modern offense, modern roster construction. Not only do they want shooting, but they want shooting depth. And obviously that's something that everybody who comes to games here at Assembly Hall has wanted to see for, a decade now, somewhere around there. Indiana's shooting from three has been a consistent issue. The fact that he said they want multiple shooters, they want depth, and they want to run an actual modern offense, I thought that was really good. And then the other thing was, he talked about they want to do the Creighton thing. They want to try to score in the first 12 seconds. So that gives you a pretty good insight into kind of like what they're going to run, what his teams are going to look like. Trevor covered that pretty much in depth in his profile, but it was interesting that Darian DeVries took the time to point that out. I thought that was pretty notable.
We heard from Scott Dolson, Pam Whitten before Darian DeVries took the podium too, Trevor. Scott Dolson said one of the things he's looking for is also modern recruiting, modern systems. Aside from that, what else stood out for you?
Well, going back to Dolson talking about Darian DeVries, was he brought up the stat that Darian DeVries had a 65% winning percentage in games decided by 5 points or fewer. So that's something they were looking at. That's kind of a judge of how good your actual coaching is. Can you draw up something and get your players through those tough times to win close games? So I thought that was interesting that Dolson brought that up. And then going back to Darian DeVries talking about the roster construction, talking about how he wants to recruit, high school players, build from the ground up, have them in the system and develop them, and then mix in, transfers and kind of fill out your roster from that point. But it sounds like, IU will start recruiting Indiana players and high school guys overall a lot more than the Mike Whitson era.
Yeah, Rabbi, obviously, you're not here to win the press conference, but, it's a big day for anyone who's named the Indiana head coach. Just how did you feel DeVries did coming off to the fan base and sort of hitting on all the key points that the fan base would want to hear?
I thought he did a fantastic job. I gave him an A+. He's a ball coach. He's, not up there to be, Mr. Public Speaker. He's there to be the basketball coach, and he can talk about it. But he made real basketball points. He didn't just ramble about generalities. When asked specific questions, he could answer the questions. He could talk about what he wants his roster to look like. He could talk about what he wants stylistically, philosophically, what he wants it to be. He was up there talking basketball. I thought it was great, and I think anybody who actually cares about basketball wants to hear about the game. How are you going to put together your team? What do you want to do to win? What are key components, key ingredients? And I thought Darian DeVries did a great job, and I thought Scott Dolson did a great job, too, of explaining, what certain criteria were that really, really mattered. Like Trevor said, what was your record in games decided by 5 points or less? Dolson mentioned, modern roster construction, modern playing style. Those are things that it's 2025. We've been talking about this for years now, that Indiana's got to freaking move forward. And they got a guy who's going to move them forward. So I thought Scott Dolson did a great job. I thought Darian DeVries did a great job. And I thought it was really cool that John Decker, who everybody on Peegs.com knows because he used to be in the space that we're in now, was a part of this doing analytical research. So I thought it was really cool that Scott Dolson leaned on John Decker because I think everybody knows how good Decker is, his talent, he's been the stat crew guy for decades, and he's really good with diving into numbers. So I thought it was cool that not only that Indiana leaned on Decker's talent, research, knowledge, but that Scott Dolson gave him credit. I thought that was a cool moment. And I also thought it showed that they're not just making a generic, we're going to go after a name because it's a name. They really did some actual research about basketball and what wins in 2025 and what wins moving forward. And that makes a lot of sense. The process makes a lot of sense, and the person they picked makes a lot of sense.
thought another thing that stood out about DeVries' press conference was that you can tell he's not the guy that wants attention, but in that setting, he's talking about basketball, and he knows what he wants to do with a program. So he's able to expand on his thoughts and really communicate it clearly. I thought that was a big thing. When you're talking about the fishbowl, we talked about it all, coaching search, that new coach has to embrace all the attention being on you. And I don't think Darian DeVries really welcomes it or doesn't really, chase the attention, but he will welcome it because he knows it's part of the job, and, he will embrace it in order to get IU to where the fans want it to be.
Yeah. And another thing that I think kind of stood out a little bit when he was talking about recruiting, talking about some of the details, he did say, when red flags come up, we're out. So that means he's not just going to take a guy because, okay, we got a hole, we can get this guy in the portal because we got a lot of money, we can pay him, he's not a good locker room guy, he's kind of a this or a that. No, he said we're out. So I think that also really helps not just your locker room, but that helps your roster. It helps your team when you have the right guys who actually fit. And he said it, you're not, I can't remember exactly how he said it, but something like you're not collecting players, not getting a collection of players. You're building a team. And those two things I thought were pretty notable as well.
I did want to get your thoughts, too. You mentioned Scott Dolson, mentioning the blueprint that he had laid out, the criteria he was looking for. It sounded a lot like what he was looking for in Indiana football's head coach, and they obviously found Curt Cignetti. You mentioned the quotes that DeVries had that sounded a lot like Curt Cignetti. A lot of parallels there, it seems like, between what Dolson was looking for the last coaching search for football and this time around for basketball.
Yeah, I think you're 100% spot on. I mean, there are not only parallels, I think some things are identical. When Dolson was looking for a football coach, he went out and talked to some people at some programs where basketball maybe historically has been your more high-profile program, but they found a coach who got football going. What were the key things that they looked for? And he put together a list. You got to have somebody who runs, a modern offense. You have to have somebody who understands quarterback play, who teaches good quarterback play. And so that there was a list of criteria that was developed, and then they took the list of criteria and said, okay, let's go find somebody who fits the criteria. We're not chasing a name. We're chasing somebody who fits the criteria. So, yeah, I thought it was very much mirrored the same process. And that's another reason I have, high confidence that Darian DeVries is going to do really well at Indiana.
Trevor Reppin is up here. Obviously, the next couple of weeks are going to be huge for Indiana, which is why it was imperative for them to get a head coach in here sooner rather than later. They obviously get Darian DeVries in here before the transfer portal opens. A lot of work to do. We saw Tucker DeVries was here, who is expected to follow him to Indiana, but these next few weeks are going to be huge in terms of roster construction, putting together a team for next year.
Yeah, Darren said he hasn't, spoken to each player yet. Some are on spring break, so he hasn't been able to reach out to them, but that will be a huge part of it. He said, he didn't recruit those guys. Those guys weren't recruited by him. So, they need to figure out what pieces will fit in his system, which pieces he can use, get along with, utilize. So it'll be interesting to see how he balances that as the portal officially opens next Monday, March 24th. So things will really pick up at that point.
Lots more to come on Peegs.com. This is not the end, just the start of the Darian DeVries era. Obviously, transfer portal news and everything else that comes with Darian DeVries. 31st head coach in Indiana basketball history. Much more to come on Peegs.com. Jeff Rabjohns, Trevor Nerstock, Jared Kelly. We'll see you folks over on the site.